In 1870, a 31-year-old businessman in Cleveland controlled about 4% of America's oil refining. 10 years later, that figure crossed 90%. By 1904, his network refined 91% of the nation's oil and handled more than 85% of final sales. No modern industry has ever been compressed under one structure so completely. His name was John D. Rockefeller, but the numbers are only the entry point. When Standard Oil was broken up in 1911, most people assumed the story ended. It didn't. The corporation was dismantled, the design was not. The method survived intact, and today it quietly organizes nearly every major industry you depend on in 2025. The fuel that moves you, the medicine prescribed to you, the banks that store your money, the platforms you use to shop, search, work, and communicate. All of them operate on the same structural logic Rockefeller perfected more than a century ago. This isn't about oil, it's about architecture. Rockefeller engineered a repeatable system built on four principles: vertical control of supply chains, horizontal elimination of competitors, regulatory protection disguised as oversight, and institutional legitimacy through law and philanthropy. Once proven, that system became the template for corporate power. Modern corporations don't need secret coordination. They follow incentives embedded in the structure itself. Markets are replaced by pipelines. Competition is replaced by consolidation. Regulation stops being a threat and starts acting as a shield. You are not choosing between independent companies. You are navigating branches of the same design. Brands rotate. Industries evolve. The structure remains. Understanding this isn't academic. It's practical. Because the system isn't neutral. It's engineered to extract value from you and concentrate it at the top. This isn't history. It's the operating environment you live inside. John D. Rockefeller did not believe he was exploiting markets. He believed he was correcting them. That distinction matters because systems become unstoppable when their creators see power as moral. Rockefeller grew up between two forces. His father was a professional liar who sold fake medical cures and vanished without warning. His mother was a devout Baptist who believed discipline, obedience, and absolute certainty were signs of righteousness. From that combination emerged a mindset perfectly suited to domination. Rockefeller believed competition was not progress. It was disorder, waste, duplication. In his worldview, thousands of small producers fighting each other destroyed value and destabilized society. One dominant organizer imposed order. And order to him was not optional, it was virtuous. This belief removed limits. If consolidation created efficiency, then resistance was immoral. If competitors refused to sell, destroying them was justified. Rockefeller did not see mercy as a virtue in business. He saw hesitation as a flaw. He believed God had chosen him to organize industry, and that conviction allowed him to act without doubt or restraint. This was not hypocrisy, it was certainty. Rockefeller did not feel guilty crushing rivals because he believed the outcome served a higher purpose. Lower prices, standardized products, predictable supply, efficiency over chaos. That mindset did not die with him. It became institutional logic. Modern corporations rarely speak in religious terms, but they follow the same principle. Markets should be controlled, not contested. Once you accept that belief, everything that follows becomes inevitable. Vertical control is necessary. Competition must be neutralized. Regulation becomes a tool. And efficiency, taken to its extreme, always concentrates power. The next step was turning that belief into machinery. Before Rockefeller imposed order, the oil industry was unstable by nature. After oil was discovered in Pennsylvania in 1859, production exploded. Wells flooded the market, prices collapsed, then shortages sent them soaring again. Fortunes were made and erased in months. Most businesses lived one downturn from failure. Rockefeller saw the flaw early. Power didn't come from drilling oil. It came from controlling what happened after it left the ground. In the 1860s, oil companies were fragmented by design. Drillers drilled, refiners refined, distributors sold, barrel makers, railroads, storage depots. Each layer extracted profit from the next. Every firm depended on external suppliers and paid for that dependence. Rockefeller identified fragmentation as the vulnerability, so he removed it. He didn't just refine oil. By the late 1860s, he owned barrel factories, tank cars, and storage facilities. He locked in long-term rail contracts and negotiated rebates competitors never saw. Step by step, inputs, transport, storage, and sales collapsed into a single controlled pipeline. This wasn't abstract efficiency, it was structural domination. While competitors paid market prices at every stage, Rockefeller set his own. If others paid 25 cents per barrel, his cost dropped closer to 15. When shipping crushed their margins, it expanded his. He could sell below their cost and still profit. They couldn't survive that math. By 1870, this system gave him control over roughly 4% of U.S. refining. It wasn't enough, but it was the foundation. Vertical integration turned pricing into a weapon. Competition stopped being about quality or innovation and became a test of endurance, and endurance always favors scale. Vertical integration gave Rockefeller cost control. Horizontal integration decided who survived. By the early 1870s, cities like Cleveland were packed with refineries, often dozens operating side by side. Margins were thin. One price swing meant bankruptcy. Rockefeller understood that as long as competitors existed, his system remained exposed, so he reduced the market to a decision. In 1872, Rockefeller approached rival refiners with an offer to sell. The terms looked fair: cash at market value, sometimes continued employment. To many owners, it seemed practical. To those who hesitated, it was the final warning. Refusal triggered the second phase. Rockefeller cut prices below cost and held them there, not for days, for months. His vertically integrated structure absorbed the losses. Smaller refineries couldn't. Every barrel sold deepened their deficit. Survival became arithmetic. This wasn't competition, it was sustained pressure. Over a short period, Cleveland's refining industry collapsed. Where dozens of independent operators once existed, nearly all were forced to sell or shut down. Rockefeller's share of refining capacity multiplied in months, not years. The method was repeatable. Offer acquisition. If refused, destroy profitability. Acquire the remains at a discount. Move to the next city. By the end of the decade, the pattern had spread nationwide. Markets stopped behaving like markets. They became consolidation funnels. When one player can survive losses indefinitely, balance disappears. This logic still governs dominant industries today. When scale guarantees survival, acquisition becomes optional. Elimination is enough. By the late 1870s, Rockefeller had achieved dominance, and dominance created two predictable enemies: public anger and the law. Monopolies attract attention. Attention attracts regulation. As outrage grew, politicians began drafting rules to limit how much power a single company could legally hold. Rockefeller understood the threat immediately. If control depended on one corporation, it could be dismantled. So he separated control from the corporation itself. In 1882, his lawyers introduced a new structure, not a company, a trust. Standard Oil's operations were divided into dozens of legally independent companies spread across multiple states. Above them sat the trust. It owned their shares, appointed their leadership, and dictated strategy. On paper, no single company violated monopoly laws. In practice, every meaningful decision flowed upward to one center. This was the critical breakthrough. The trust allowed Rockefeller to comply with the letter of the law while neutralizing its purpose. Regulators could split companies apart, but they could not reach the structure binding them together. Power no longer lived where laws were written to strike. Control stopped depending on refineries, railcars, or pipelines. It depended on ownership of coordination. The trust produced nothing. It sold nothing. It competed with no one. It simply governed everything beneath it. This structure did not disappear. It evolved. The modern holding company is its direct descendant. One parent entity, dozens of subsidiaries, legal separation, centralized authority, liability dispersed, control intact. Once power is organized this way, breakups don't weaken it, they increase it. Regulation stops being a threat and becomes a mechanism the system absorbs. With the trust, Rockefeller solved the final problem of dominance. He made it permanent. By the time Rockefeller dominated oil, he understood a deeper truth. Markets don't decide winners. Rules do. Competition can survive scale. It cannot survive regulation written by the largest player. Rockefeller didn't fight the government. He learned to use it. Railroads were the lifeline of the oil industry. Instead of treating them as neutral infrastructure, Rockefeller turned them into allies. He negotiated secret rebate agreements that lowered his shipping costs while raising them for competitors. The same rails carried everyone's oil. The rules were not the same. He applied the same logic to standards and oversight. Rockefeller supported regulations for oil quality and safety, knowing his refineries could comply while smaller operators could not. On paper, these rules protected consumers. In practice, they eliminated rivals. This is regulatory capture. When an industry shapes the laws meant to restrain it. Rockefeller didn't need to break rules, he helped write them. Once regulation favors incumbents, enforcement becomes a barrier to entry. New competitors face compliance costs they cannot afford. Established players absorb them easily. The result is stability that looks like fairness. Prices stop fluctuating. Supply becomes predictable. Risk disappears for those already inside the system. The market appears regulated. In reality, it is locked. This mechanism didn't end with oil. It became standard practice. Modern corporations lobby for complex rules, licensing requirements, and compliance frameworks that sound responsible and function as walls. Regulation doesn't remove power, it concentrates it. Once the rulebook is written by those at the top, competition becomes theoretical. The market still exists, but its outcome is already decided. After monopolies are built, protected, and stabilized, one problem remains: legitimacy. Rockefeller was not just powerful, he was hated. He was blamed for bankruptcies, job losses, and the destruction of entire industries. Economic dominance alone could not secure the system's future. To survive long-term, power had to be reframed as virtue. The solution was philanthropy. In 1913, Rockefeller transferred hundreds of millions of dollars into charitable foundations. Publicly, this was generosity. Structurally, it was a transformation of control. Wealth that could have been taxed, challenged, or redistributed was instead placed into institutions that Rockefeller designed, governed, and influenced indefinitely. These foundations decided which universities received funding, which medical schools expanded, which research paths were supported. Entire academic and scientific fields began adapting to the priorities of the funding structure. Dependence replaced independence. This was not charity as compassion, it was architecture. By financing education and medicine, Rockefeller didn't simply support progress, he directed it. Medical training shifted toward pharmaceutical and industrial models. Research followed grant incentives. Institutions learned that survival required alignment. Public perception changed. The monopolist became a benefactor. The man accused of crushing competitors was now shaping the future. Power that once looked predatory began to look benevolent. This model spread everywhere. Foundations became instruments of reputation management, policy influence, and long-term control. Wealth no longer ended with death. It governed quietly through institutions, generations removed from its origin. This isn't conspiracy. It's documented structure. Philanthropy didn't dilute the system, it finalized it. When control is wrapped in generosity, resistance dissolves. The system stops looking imposed, it starts looking deserved. By the time Rockefeller's system was complete, it no longer depended on him. That was the intention. Companies changed, industries expanded, names on buildings rotated, but the structure remained fixed. Control the supply chain, remove alternatives, shape regulation, convert power into legitimacy. Repeat. Today you don't interact with open markets. You interact with finished systems. You buy fuel from companies born out of consolidated empires. You shop through platforms that own logistics, data, and infrastructure. You search, communicate, borrow, and insure yourself inside architectures designed to make exit impractical. Choice still exists, but only inside narrow boundaries. You can choose brands, not systems. You can switch providers, not pipelines. Every path leads back to the same concentrated control. This is Rockefeller's real achievement. Not wealth, not dominance, permanence. The system isn't evil, it's efficient. It delivers lower prices, faster delivery, predictable outcomes. It works, that's why it spreads, that's why it survives regulation, and that's why it becomes invisible. But invisibility doesn't mean neutrality. Every day, money flows upward through this structure. Fuel, healthcare, finance, technology, logistics. Small, routine transactions aggregate into massive transfers of wealth toward the same consolidated entities. You don't notice it because no single payment feels significant. The system relies on that. So there are only three responses: ignore it and remain inside it without understanding. Fight it, knowing resistance is costly and rarely decisive, or study it and position accordingly. Rockefeller chose ownership. While everyone else bought from the system, he owned the system. You cannot step outside this structure, but you can recognize it. And once you do, the economy stops looking random. Outcomes stop feeling accidental. Patterns become visible. The system didn't end in 1911, it adapted. And every day, whether you see it or not, you pay into it.